The bullet hadn't been fired yet, but 3,000 meters away, in a frozen mountain fortress carved into the spine of the Hindu Kush, a man was already dead. He just didn't know it. She was 23 years old, 5'6", 130 pounds of quiet from the flatlands of Montana. The generals had argued about sending her. The veterans on the team had gone cold when they heard her name. Her? Up there? In those conditions? One shot, one target, one chance. And the woman everyone underestimated was already on the mountain. If this story already has you locked in, hit subscribe right now. Every week we bring you stories like this. Stories about people who were counted out, pushed back, told they didn't belong, and then changed everything. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Like this video, stay until the end, and let's begin. The first thing people noticed about Erica Lane was that she didn't blink enough. It wasn't a medical thing. Her father had taken her to a doctor when she was 8, convinced something was wrong. The doctor had shrugged, said her blink rate was simply low, that some people were wired that way. Her father had driven home in silence, then looked at her in the rearview mirror with an expression she would spend years trying to decode. Not concern. Something closer to recognition. Like he'd seen this before, in himself, in the Marine Corps, in the cold places where men learned to be still or died being loud. Erica grew up in Lolo, Montana. Barely a town, more a collection of stubborn choices made by stubborn people against the mountains. Population just over 3,000 if you counted generously. The kind of place where the grocery store doubled as the post office, where hunting season wasn't a hobby, but a schedule, and where silence wasn't awkward. It was just the weather. Her mother had left when Erica was 4. She had no clear memory of the woman. Just a smell, lavender and cigarettes, and the sound of a screen door in summer. Her father, Dale Lane, had raised her the only way he knew how, with structure, early mornings, and the expectation that weakness was something you noticed in yourself before the world noticed it for you. Dale had done 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan as a Marine Scout sniper before a roadside device took 2 fingers off his right hand and ended his career. He'd come back to Lolo because there was nowhere else to go. He taught high school history 5 days a week and spent his weekends doing what felt more natural than breathing, shooting. Erica started at age 8 with a .22 caliber rimfire. Not because Dale pushed her, because she asked. She'd been watching him one morning from the porch, coffee in her small hands, studying the way he pressed the rifle stock against his shoulder with a gentleness that seemed out of place in a man with his calluses and his silences. "Can I try?" she had asked. He'd looked at her for a long moment. Then he'd said, "Come here." That was the whole conversation. 2. By the time Erica was 12, she was shooting groups at 300 yards that made Dale set down his own rifle and stare. It wasn't just accuracy. Any patient person could learn accuracy. What she had was harder to explain and impossible to teach. She felt wind the way musicians felt rhythm, not consciously, not by calculation, but by some interior register that processed information faster than language allowed. She'd watch a tree line, wait, then make a micro-adjustment to her scope 2 seconds before the wind actually shifted. Dale tested her. He set up targets without telling her the distances. He changed conditions. He introduced noise, interruptions, cold, heat. She adapted to all of it without drama, without complaint, without being asked. "You're reading something," he told her once after she'd put 3 rounds through the same hole at 400 meters. "What do you mean?" "Out there. The terrain. You're reading it. Most people look at landscape and see scenery. You're seeing information." She didn't know what to say to that, so she reloaded. At school, this quality made her invisible in the way that certain kinds of intelligence make people invisible. Not because she was quiet, but because she watched. She studied people the same way she studied landscape. She noticed what they were doing before they did it. That made people uncomfortable in ways they couldn't name, so they gave it a label that fit easier, strange. The boys in her class hunted. They took it seriously. They talked about it loudly, compared kill shots, posted photos, established a hierarchy of who was most dangerous in the woods. One fall, a junior named Travis Kohler, broad-shouldered, son of a rancher, king of a small kingdom, had set up a long-range challenge at the county range. 500 yards, steel plates. Whoever hit the most in 60 seconds won a pot of $40 collected from 12 shooters. Erica showed up without announcing herself. Travis had looked at her from under the brim of his hat and smiled the way certain boys smile when they think something is going to be easy. "You sure about this?" he said. "Already paid my entry," she said. She went last. By then, Travis had hit 9 of 12. Nobody had topped him. Erica hit 12 of 12 in 41 seconds. The range went quiet in the specific way that embarrassment creates quiet. Not silence, but the complete absence of whatever sound had been filling the space before. Travis stared at the steel downrange. He didn't say a word. He picked up his rifle case and walked to his truck. She took the $40 and drove home. Dale was at the kitchen table when she walked in. She set the money on the counter. "How'd it go?" he asked, without looking up from the newspaper. "Fine," she said. 3. The real problem wasn't that she was good. The real problem was what to do with it. At 16, she could outshoot anyone in the county. At 17, she was traveling to national competitions and quietly destroying people twice her age who had invested their identities in being the best in the room. She didn't trash talk. She didn't celebrate. She shot, verified her hits, and waited for whatever came next. Her father understood her well enough to know that competitions weren't going to be enough. She needed a mission. "You've thought about the military," he said one evening. Not a question. "Constantly," she said. "It's not going to be what you expect." "I know." "You don't." He put down his coffee. "I don't mean the physical part. You'll handle that. I mean the other part. The way people decide what you are before you open your mouth. The way a room changes when you walk in and you're not what they were picturing." Erica looked at him. "Is that supposed to make me not go?" Dale was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I'm saying go in knowing it. Don't let it be a surprise. Surprises make you angry, and anger makes you sloppy." She nodded. She had already made her decision weeks earlier. She just hadn't told him yet. What? 4. She enlisted at 18 and applied for the Special Operations Support Pipeline that fed marksmanship specialists into reconnaissance and long-range interdiction roles. The recruiter, a heavy-set staff sergeant named Bowers with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his uniform, had looked at her shooting records and then looked at her. "These numbers accurate?" he asked. "Call the range," she said. He'd made 2 phone calls before he was done. Basic training was noise and pressure and sleep deprivation, and Erica absorbed all of it with the same patience she applied to a 2-hour shooting position hold. The women around her were competitive and exhausted. Some of them were close to breaking. A few already had. The drill instructors were looking for that break, cataloging it, using it. Erica didn't break. She didn't perform toughness either, which bothered certain drill sergeants more than weakness would have. "Lane," one of them said, a woman named Petrocelli who'd come up through airborne and treated softness as a communicable disease. "What's your problem?" Erica was in the middle of a set of push-ups. She didn't stop. "No problem, Sergeant." "You look like you're asleep." "I'm focused, Sergeant." Petrocelli crouched down to be level with her. "Focused people sweat." "I'm sweating, Sergeant." "Focused people look like they're working." "I'm working, Sergeant." Petrocelli stood up, walked away. Didn't come back to her station for 3 days. After that, the drill sergeants left Erica alone in that specific way that meant they'd quietly decided she wasn't a project. Navy Sniper School was different. Everything before it, basic infantry fundamentals, advanced marksmanship qualification, had been about filtering who couldn't keep up. Sniper School was about filtering who had the specific combination of stillness, precision, and operational intelligence that made the difference between a good shooter and a weapon system that worked independently in the worst possible conditions. Of the 19 students who started the course, only 7 would finish. There were 2 other women besides Erica. One washed out in week 2 due to an equipment failure that turned into a judgment failure. She panicked when it mattered and made a call that would have compromised a simulated patrol. The other made it to week 7 before a stress fracture in her left tibia ended it. Erica kept going. The instructors were former operators, Special Forces, Ranger Regiment, Naval Special Warfare. And they shared one quality. They had seen enough to know exactly what they were looking at when they watched a shooter. They couldn't be impressed by performance alone. They'd seen performance. They were looking for something underneath it. Her primary evaluator was a master sergeant named Holt, 12 years in the Ranger sniper program. Quiet the way ex-operators go quiet. Not social quiet, but professionally compressed. He watched Erica with an expression she recognized from her father. Not skepticism, assessment. During her long-range qualification evolution, a timed engagement at 800 meters, moving targets, wind crossing at 12 miles per hour, she went through the problem the way she went through all problems. Without urgency, without rush, with something that looked from the outside like disinterest, but was actually total absorption. She hit all 5 targets. 3 were moving. Holt marked his clipboard and said nothing. After the course, during the evaluation debrief, he said to her, "Your read on wind is the best I've seen in 15 years of doing this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." It was the most he'd said to her in 8 weeks. "Yes, Sergeant," she said. She went home that night and called her father. "I finished," she said. Dale Lane didn't say anything for a moment. She could hear him breathing. "Your mother would have hated this," he finally said. "I know," Erica said. "I don't," he said quietly. "I think she would have been scared." "There's a difference?" Another pause. "Yeah," Dale said. "There is." Yes. 6. She arrived at Forward Operating Base Valor 11 months later. The base sat in the Kunar province of Afghanistan, deep in a valley that the mountains pressed in from 3 sides like a fist slowly closing. The elevation alone was a weapon. Knees and lungs and morale all deteriorated faster here, where the air had less oxygen and the cold came early and stayed mean. The operational detachment she was being attached to as a long-range fire support specialist had been in country for 7 months. They were tired in the permanent way that 7 months of combat rotation creates. Not physically exhausted, but ground down at some deeper level, like a tool that's been properly maintained but is still just worn. Their team sergeant was a man named Decker. 6'2", Louisiana-born, with a beard that had probably violated grooming standards for 6 straight months. He met her at the vehicle bay when she stepped off the helicopter, looked at her gear, and said, "You're Lane." "Yes, Sergeant." "How old are you?" 22. "Combat experience?" 1 rotation, Kandahar, 14 confirmed long-range engagements. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're computing information rather than agreeing with it. "You'll bunk with the team medic. Female billeting is in Module 3. We have a brief at 05 tomorrow." He started to turn away. "Sergeant," she said. He turned back. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "Not aggressive, just calm." Decker looked at her for a long moment. "Do you? That this is going to be a problem. Is it going to be a problem?" "No," she said. He studied her for another second. "Get your kit squared away." She did. 7. The problem wasn't Decker. The problem was a staff sergeant named Briggs. Marcus Briggs had been with the team since its formation. He was 31 years old, had 3 combat tours in 3 different theaters, and carried himself with the particular confidence of a man who had been tested and had not broken. He was competent, respected, and deeply genuinely certain that Erica Lane had no business being here. He didn't say it directly at first. He said it in smaller ways. The 2-second delay before responding to her at briefings, the absence of eye contact during operations planning, the way he talked about positions and ranges without including her in the conversation, as if she were a piece of furniture that happened to be in the room. After 4 days during a planning session for a reconnaissance mission into the northeast ridgeline, Briggs pulled up a topographical display and began walking through the overwatch positions. "We set the primary position here." He indicated a rock formation at 1,100 meters from the objective, and secondary falls back to... "The secondary's not going to work," Erica said. Everyone in the room went still. Briggs turned slowly. "What?" "The secondary position." She pulled the topo map toward her and traced a finger along the ridge. "This whole face is southern exposure. By the time you need to fall back to secondary, which will be late afternoon based on your timeline, you'll have direct sun in your optics for 2 hours. You'll be blind." Silence. Briggs looked at the map. Back at her. "I've run Overwatch in this valley before," he said. "I know. I read your after-action reports." A pause. You mentioned sun glare on page 4. More silence. Decker cleared his throat. Pull the secondary to the eastern boulder field. Adjust the timeline. Briggs picked up his own copy of the map. He didn't look at Erica again. She didn't need him to. 8. The mission went clean. The team extracted without contact. The intelligence they gathered was high value. Briggs said nothing to her about the position correction, but in the debrief, when the intelligence officer asked about the Overwatch setup, Briggs said, "We made a late adjustment to secondary, called it right." We. Erica caught it. She let it go. She had enough experience to understand something her father had told her before she shipped out. In tight teams, credit is tribal. You either earn your way into the tribe or you don't. But arguing about credit is a way of telling everyone you're still outside it. She filed that away and went back to work. 3 weeks in, she had 5 more missions logged. Each time, she did something that wasn't on the ops order. Spotted an anomaly, identified a secondary threat, made a calculation that the mission structure hadn't accounted for. Not showing off, just doing the job the way the job required being done. Slowly, incrementally, the way trust builds in high-stakes environments, not through declarations but through accumulated repetition, the team stopped treating her like a problem to be managed. Briggs never apologized. She didn't expect him to. But she noticed the day he started directing tactical questions at her during planning sessions. That was enough. That was actually everything. 9. The intelligence report came in on a Tuesday. A high-value target, a regional commander responsible for coordinating 3 separate insurgent networks across the province, had been tracked to a fortified compound in the Korengal, approximately 40 kilometers northeast of the base. He moved irregularly, stayed mobile, and had survived 3 previous targeting attempts through a combination of sound intelligence tradecraft and good fortune. Now, for the first time in 18 months, there was a confirmed location. The compound sat at 9,200 feet of elevation, built into a ridgeline that made vehicle approach impossible and helicopter insertion likely to be heard. The surrounding terrain was exposed, mined in approach corridors, and watched by at least 4 observation posts that relayed via radio to the main structure. There was one option that didn't involve a full assault element and the casualties that would come with it. A sniper team. Long distance, static hide position, single-shot solution. The estimated range from any viable Overwatch position to the compound's main courtyard, the only area the target was confirmed to use, was somewhere between 2,800 and 3,200 meters, roughly 2 miles, in mountain conditions, at altitude, in winter. Decker put the targeting package on the table during the intelligence brief and looked at his team. "Opinions," he said. Everyone did the math silently. Briggs leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said, "That's not a sniper mission. That's a Hail Mary." Several heads nodded. Erica looked at the package, studied the elevation data, the temperature charts, the wind history for the corridor going back 6 months. "What's the window?" she asked. The intelligence officer pulled up the analysis. Target is confirmed present through Thursday, 48 hours. After that, pattern of life suggests movement. 48 hours. She looked up from the data. "I need a spotter," she said. The room went quiet in a way that was different from before. Not resistant. Waiting. Decker looked at her. "You understand what you're proposing?" "Yes. If the weather turns, I know. If the target's position changes by 50 meters, I know, Sergeant." She met his eyes. "I've been watching this valley for 3 weeks. I know what this terrain does. I know the wind cycles at altitude." She paused. "Nobody else in this room has made a shot beyond 1,400 meters in mountain conditions." Another silence. "I have." Decker looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at the table. She watched the decision form in Decker's expression. Not enthusiasm, not certainty, but something harder than both of those. The recognition that sometimes the only option available was the one that seemed impossible. "You'll have Lucas Cole as your spotter. He's the best I've got." She nodded. "When do we move?" Decker checked the timeline. "You go up the mountain at 0300 tomorrow." She stood, picked up the targeting package, and walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard Briggs speak. Not loudly. Almost to himself. "This is insane. he said. She stopped at the doorway, didn't turn around. Probably, she said, and walked out into the Afghan night. Outside, the cold hit her like a wall. She stopped in the dark, looked up at the ridgeline 40 kilometers northeast, a black mass against a sky full of stars she couldn't name in any language. Somewhere up there, in a compound built into rock, a man was sleeping with the confidence of someone who believed the mountain protected him. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked toward the armory. There was a rifle to prepare. She had 16 hours. Somewhere behind her, she heard the door to the briefing room open. Footsteps. She didn't look back. The voice that found her in the dark wasn't Decker's. It was Briggs. Lane. She stopped, turned. He was standing a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, face unreadable in the low light from the base perimeter. He was quiet for a moment, like he was testing words in his mind before releasing them. My first shot over 1,000 meters, he finally said. I missed. She waited. Wind call was wrong. I'd been so sure. He paused. Cost us the target. Almost cost us 2 team members on the extract. She didn't say anything. I'm not saying you're going to miss, he said. I'm saying... He stopped. Started again. I'm saying this mountain doesn't care how good you are. She held his gaze. I know, she said. He nodded once, turned and walked back toward the building. She stood there a moment longer in the dark. The mountain doesn't care how good you are. She turned and kept walking. Above her, somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and went silent. The stars didn't move. The mountain waited. She spent the first hour in the armory alone. Not because she needed the time, she knew her rifle the way most people knew their own hands. Every tolerance, every idiosyncrasy, every place where the machine had its own opinion. She'd stripped and rebuilt this particular chassis 47 times since it was issued to her. She knew the trigger brake to the gram. She knew the way the bolt felt when the temperature dropped below 20 degrees Fahrenheit and the metal contracted just enough to change the extraction behavior by a fraction that didn't matter to most shooters and mattered enormously to her. She spent the hour there because she needed to be alone with the decision. The armory at FOB Valor was a narrow room that smelled of CLP and burnt powder, and the particular staleness of a space that was used constantly but never quite ventilated. A single fluorescent tube buzzed overhead, one end flickering at irregular intervals, and the light it produced was the color of old teeth. She sat on a wooden stool at the cleaning bench and broke the rifle down component by component, setting each piece on a white cloth in the order she always used, and cleaned what didn't need cleaning because the process itself was the point. Her hands worked automatically. Her mind was on the mountain. The elevation profile that the intelligence package had provided showed a gain of roughly 4,100 feet from the vehicle drop point to the estimated hide position. That was not a short climb under any circumstances. Under winter conditions and darkness, carrying a system that weighed 22 pounds before optics and support equipment, with a tactical load on top of that, it was the kind of effort that separated people who were in good shape from people who had decided, at some cellular level, that stopping was not an option they were willing to consider. She wasn't worried about the climb. She was thinking about the wind. Mountain wind at altitude was not the clean, predictable crosswind you dealt with on a flat range. It was a conversation between terrain features, valleys that accelerated it, ridgelines that broke it into competing streams, temperature differentials between sunlit and shadowed faces that created vertical movement nobody's ballistic tables accounted for cleanly. Every mountain had its own wind personality, and you didn't learn it from charts. You learned it from time spent in it. She had 3 weeks of observation data. Wind logs she'd been keeping in a small green notebook twice daily, recording direction and estimated velocity from the overwatch position she'd occupied on previous missions. It was something she'd started doing as a habit long before anyone told her to, a practice her father had drilled into her at 12 years old, sitting on a ridge above the Lolo River, watching a meadow for an hour before he let her raise the rifle. The land tells you, he'd said, if you're quiet enough to hear it. She reassembled the rifle, checked the scope, reset the turrets to 0, pulled around from the box on the bench, .338 Lapua Magnum, loaded to a specification she'd worked out with the unit armorer over 6 weeks and 3 range sessions, and held it under the flickering light, brass and copper and physics. She set it back in the box and started loading magazines. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn around immediately. She'd heard the particular squeak of that hinge enough times to know it wasn't Decker's knock or Briggs's deliberate stride. This was someone smaller, lighter on their feet. "You always clean a rifle that's already clean?" Lucas Cole sat down on the bench across from her, set down a thermos, and poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted one. He was 26, from somewhere in eastern Tennessee that he rarely talked about, with light eyes and the kind of lean build that appeared in people who'd been moving through mountains long enough that their body had made peace with it. He'd been with the team for 4 months, slightly newer than her, which was why Decker had probably figured they'd work well together. Neither of them had a territory to defend. She took the coffee. "When do you sleep?" he asked. "Before the brief. That's 4 hours from now." "I know." He looked at the rifle on the cloth, at the organized components, at the round she'd been holding, which she'd set back down at the edge of the cloth. "You read the targeting package?" she asked. "Twice." "And?" Cole wrapped both hands around his coffee cup, looked at the wall. He had a habit of answering questions by thinking about them first, which she'd noticed in their first week working together and had come to appreciate in a way she hadn't expected. Most people answered before they'd finished forming the thought. "The range is real," he said. 3,100 meters is what I get from the topo, depending on exactly where you establish. Wind is the problem. We'll have a 12-kilometer corridor coming down the northeast face that's going to do whatever it wants." He paused. "The elevation loss from your barrel to the target's courtyard is about 300 feet. Bullet will be traveling for over 7 seconds. 7 seconds. In 7 seconds, a person could take 4 steps. A door could open. A child could run into the courtyard from a doorway. Wind speed could shift 6 miles per hour. 7 seconds was a very long time for a bullet to be in the air, which is to say, it was a very long time for everything to go wrong. "I know," she said. "I'm not saying we can't do it." "I know you're not." Cole drank his coffee. She drank hers. The fluorescent light buzzed and flickered. "You've taken a shot over 2,000 meters before?" he asked. Not challenging, just asking. She glanced at him. "Kandahar. 2,200, moving target. Headwind at 8. He absorbed this. "How long was that bullet in the air?" 4.6 seconds. He was quiet for a moment. "What was that like?" She thought about the question with more honesty than she usually gave it. "Longest 4.6 seconds of my life," she said. Cole almost smiled. Almost. "Get some sleep," he said, standing. "I'll have the kit staged by 0230. "Cole," he stopped. "You've been reading wind for how long?" 6 years? "Competitive shooting?" "Some. Mostly just hills. My uncle had property in the Smokies. We'd go out on weekends." He shrugged in the specific way that people shrug when they're simplifying something that was actually complicated. "Learned to read weather from watching my uncle get it wrong. He was stubborn about admitting error, so I learned to see the error before he could make it." She nodded. "That was the best kind of education for this work. Learning from failure that wasn't yours, so you could avoid it without carrying the cost." "Get some rest," she said. He nodded and left. She sat alone again with the rifle and the coffee and the flickering light and the decision she'd already made and was now just waiting to execute. Outside, the mountain waited. She thought about what Briggs had said. The mountain doesn't care how good you are. She'd been thinking about it wrong, she realized. He hadn't been issuing a warning, he'd been sharing something. The difference was small but real. She finished the coffee, stood, repacked the cleaning kit, and went to find a cot. She was asleep in 6 minutes. She dreamed about Montana, about a summer morning when she was 9 years old, lying in tall grass on a ridge above a meadow where her father had told her a mule deer bedded. She'd been there for 2 hours when the deer finally appeared at the far edge of the clearing, 300 yards, easily, maybe more, and her father had placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "Not yet. Watch it first. Know where it's going before you decide." She'd watched the deer for another 20 minutes. Then she'd made the shot. In the dream, the deer didn't fall. It just stood there and looked at her across the distance, ears up, perfectly still, as if the distance between them was not something a bullet could cross. She woke up at 2:15, 15 minutes before her alarm. Old habit. She lay in the dark for 30 seconds, letting the dream dissolve, letting the mission take its place. Then she got up. The day had already started. The mountain was not getting any closer on its own. She dressed, ate a cold meal she didn't taste, and walked out into the pre-dawn dark of FOB Valor, where Cole was waiting at the vehicle bay with the gear staged exactly as she'd have done it herself. System case laid flat, not upright. Spotting scope in a padded roll separate from the tripod. Both packs loaded front heavy for the climb. She looked at the staging, looked at him. "Good," she said. "I've been up since midnight," he said. There was no complaint in it. "Sleep on the mountain?" "Absolutely not." Decker appeared from the TOC with a radio handset and a folded message form. He handed her the form without preamble. She read it. Updated intelligence. The target's presence at the compound had been reconfirmed by a source inside the valley 4 hours ago. There was also new information, a secondary structure on the compound's eastern side that hadn't appeared in the original package, estimated to house additional personnel, number unknown. She handed the form back to Decker. "Changes anything?" he asked. "Secondary structure is on the wrong side of the courtyard to create a shooting problem," she said. "It might change extraction risk if they push out of the eastern building after the shot." "They will push out." "I know. Cole and I will be moving before the echo clears." She paused. "How long do we have on the ground before you lose the ability to send the QRF?" 6 hours from your insertion point. After that, the weather window closes and we can't get birds in the valley." 6 hours. 4,100 feet of elevation gain in the dark. Hide time. The shot. Then 4,100 feet back down with people who wanted them dead moving through the terrain. "Fine," she said. Decker looked at her with the same expression he'd had in the briefing room. Not approval, not doubt. Just the look of a man who had made a decision and was watching it become real. "Lane," he paused. "You make the shot and then you come home. That's the whole mission." "Understood. I'm not asking for heroics, I'm asking for precision and a clean extract." "That's what you're getting, Sergeant." He handed Cole the radio handset. "Comms check at insert point, channel 7 primary, 12 secondary. If you lose both, then we're coming home quiet," Cole said. Decker nodded. "Vehicle's ready. Go." They went. The drive to the vehicle drop point took 40 minutes on roads that didn't deserve the name. Packed dirt and loose rock that made the truck fishtail on every curve. Headlights off for the last 15 minutes. The driver navigating by night vision, while Erica sat in the back with the system case across her lap and her eyes closed. Not sleeping. Calculating. She was running through the shot in her mind. Not the outcome, the process. Wind calculation at 500 meters, at 1,500, at 2,500, at the target. The bullet would spend the first 500 meters in relatively predictable atmosphere before it entered the valley's wind dynamics. After that, the only data she'd have would be what Cole could observe in real time, mirage off the terrain surface, vegetation movement, dust, and what she could see through her own optics, and the dozens of small decisions accumulated over 3 weeks of watching this valley breathe. The truck stopped. "End of line," the driver said. They got out into cold so clean it felt like breathing glass. The stars were enormous here. Altitude and distance from any light source made the sky look close enough to touch, which was beautiful and completely irrelevant. She shouldered her pack, took the system case. Cole took the spotting scope roll and his own pack. They didn't speak. The mountain rose in front of them like a wall of darkness, and they started climbing. The first hour was the worst. Loose shale and ice-sheeted rock in the dark. Every footfall a decision. The elevation gained steep enough that each step was a controlled fall forward and up. She moved with trekking poles she'd borrowed from the unit's cold weather gear, using them to catch herself twice in the first 30 minutes when her boot broke through ice that had looked solid. Cole moved behind her in her footsteps, which was good technique, but also meant he got no warning before a bad patch of terrain. He didn't complain. Neither did she. At 11,000 feet, she called a water break. 2 minutes, sitting against a rock face that blocked the wind from the east. She drank, ate a block of compressed calories that tasted like cardboard and chalk, and checked her watch. 93 minutes in. They were 200 meters ahead of her projected pace, which was good because the weather report had given them a tight window. "How are you?" she asked. Cole was breathing through his nose, controlled. "I'm fine. Tell me if you're not." "I know. I mean it. I need you functional at the position, not just present." He looked at her. "I've been to 13,000 feet twice before. I know what this feels like. I'm fine." He paused. "How are you?" She considered the question honestly. Her left knee was carrying something. Not pain yet, but the early signal of a joint that had been asked to do the same motion for 90 minutes at an angle that wasn't natural. She'd taped it before the climb. It would hold. "Fine," she said. "How's the knee?" She looked at him. "You've been favoring your left side for 20 minutes, he said without apology. "Not much, but I'm behind you." She was quiet for a moment. "It'll hold," she said. He nodded. 2 minutes up. They stood and kept climbing. The next 2 hours were not dramatically different from the first. The mountain got harder as it got higher, which mountains do without caring about your schedule or your mission. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up from the northeast, exactly as the weather model had predicted, which was useful data even if the wind itself was unpleasant. It meant the model was tracking correctly for the valley, and that her pre-calculated dope had a better-than-average chance of being accurate at the target range. At 4 hours, they were at the estimated hide position. She knew it from the terrain description in the targeting package before she saw it. A natural rock shelf protruding from the ridgeline at approximately 12,400 feet, with a clear sight line down into the valley below and across to the eastern mountain face where the compound sat. The shelf was maybe 8 feet wide and 12 feet deep, partially roofed by an overhang that would prevent visual detection from observation posts on the valley floor. She set the system case down and stood at the forward edge. Below her and across the valley, in the pale gray light that was beginning to separate the mountains from the sky, she could see the compound. Stone walls, 3 structures, a watchtower on the northwest corner, the courtyard she'd been looking at in satellite imagery for 3 days. 3,100 meters, give or take, almost exactly what the topo had said. She stood there for a full minute. Cole came up beside her and unpacked the spotting scope without being told. He set it on the tripod, dialed in the range, found the courtyard. "I've got eyes on," he said quietly. "Activity?" 2 sentries on the wall. Watchtower has 1. Courtyard is clear." She turned away from the edge and began preparing the position. The hide setup took 40 minutes done properly, and she did it properly despite the cold and the growing urgency of the timeline. She laid out the shooting mat, extended the bipod, positioned the system so the barrel had a clear line through a gap in the rock that was 8 inches wide and 4 inches tall, enough to shoot through, small enough that from the valley below it would look like shadow. Cole ranged everything. Primary courtyard, 3,080 meters. Secondary structure doorway, 3,140. The watchtower, 2,910. She noted all of it in the small green notebook and set the turrets. Then she got behind the rifle, settled her body into the position she'd trained in so many times that the geometry of it was automatic, and looked through the scope. The compound swam into view, magnified, real, close enough to see the construction quality of the stone walls. Rough mortared, old, built to last rather than built fast. The courtyard was packed earth with a shallow depression in the center where rain had pooled and frozen. She could see the breadth of the sentry on the northwest wall. "Range confirmed at 3080, Cole said. "Wind is reading light from the northwest at the position, 3 to 5. I'm going to need time to read the valley mid-range." "Take it," she said. He settled behind the spotting scope and went quiet. She waited. That was the mission now. They had arrived. The work ahead of them was not climbing or planning or preparing. The work was the oldest skill Erica Lane had learned, the one her father had taught her on a ridge above a Montana meadow when she was 9 years old, lying in tall grass, watching a clearing. The work was waiting, but waiting here, at altitude in winter, on a rock shelf in a hostile valley, was not what most people imagined when they heard the word. It was active. It was constant micro-adjustment, to body temperature, to muscle fatigue, to the way the cold was seeping through the mat, and into her bones. It was watching the value every shift in the scope image. It was listening to Cole's slow, steady breathing next to her and calibrating her own to match it. An hour passed. Then 2. "I've got mid-valley wind red," Cole said. "South-southeast at 6 to 8. Variable. There's a thermal coming off the east face that's creating some vertical component." Vertical component. That was the problem. The bullet's trajectory was calculated in a flat plane. Vertical movement, updrafts, downdrafts, introduced a variable that couldn't be compensated for mechanically, only estimated. And estimated meant not guaranteed. "How consistent is the thermal?" she asked. "Irregular. Every 4 to 6 minutes I'm seeing a shift." She processed that. "I need 20 minutes of your reads to build the pattern." "I know," Cole said. "I'm timing it." They went back to silence. She lay behind the rifle with the scope fixed on the courtyard entrance and didn't move. The cold was real now. It had passed through the mat and the clothing and was working on her joints, fingers, wrists, elbows, all carrying a background ache that she was aware of and had chosen to defer addressing until after the mission. A frostbite concern was on the edge of the operational window, but not inside it. She'd established that line before they left. Cole logged 6 thermal events over the next 22 minutes and read them to her in the flat, precise language that good spotters develop. Not dramatic, not colorful, just accurate. She wrote the times and the estimated magnitudes. Pattern: 4 to 7 minute cycle. Magnitude: roughly 6 to 9 feet of vertical displacement at range, depending on the bullet's transit time through the thermal layer. That was significant. At 3,100 meters, a 9-foot displacement was the difference between the shot she was here to take and a miss that could end the mission and start a pursuit. "What's your call?" Cole asked. She'd been doing the math. "Between thermal events," she said, "there's a 2 to 3 minute window after each event where the air is relatively clean. That's my firing window." "That means you might wait hours for the target and then have to hit the window inside 3 minutes of him appearing." "Yes." "And if he appears during a thermal?" "Then I wait for the next window." Cole was quiet. "That could be another 6 minutes," he said. "I know. A lot can happen in 6 minutes at a target site." "I know, Cole." She didn't say it sharply, just clearly. He went quiet again. She could feel him thinking, which was different from the silence of someone who had nothing to say. "You've done this before," he said. Not a question. Not at this range. But this kind of calculation, the waiting. She thought about the meadow, the deer, the 20 minutes of watching. "Yes," she said. He exhaled through his nose. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "Okay," he said. And that was the whole conversation. The hours accumulated. Her water froze in the outer pocket of her pack, and she moved it to the inner pocket against her body. The sentries on the compound wall changed rotation twice, which gave her useful data about personnel movement, but told her nothing about the target. Cole ate without leaving the spotting scope, which she noticed and appreciated. She ate without leaving the rifle. At hour 7, 2 hours past Decker's 6-hour window, Cole said quietly, "Lane." She had already seen it. Movement at the main structure doorway. A figure emerging, pulling a coat tighter in the cold. Another figure behind him, larger, carrying a weapon. A bodyguard probably, or a senior aide. The first figure walked into the courtyard and stopped near the center depression. Cole ranged him without being asked. 3075, 4-meter split from my morning reference point. She adjusted. 4 meters east. Wind is... Wait! Cole's voice flattened. "I've got a thermal building on the east face." She saw it too in the mirage signature along the valley floor, the distortion pattern that meant heated air was rising and beginning to curl across the corridor. The figure in the courtyard looked up at the sky, spoke to the bodyguard. They were going back inside. "How long on the thermal?" she asked. 90 seconds to clear, maybe 2 minutes. The figure turned back toward the structure doorway. She breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The figure was walking. She did not fire. She watched him walk back through the doorway. The door closed. Cole let out a slow breath. That was the window. There'll be another one, she said. He looked at her. She couldn't see his expression from behind the rifle, but she felt it, the edge of disbelief. Not in her, she thought, in the situation. Lane, we're 2 hours past the extract window. I know. If we have contact on the way down, I know, Cole. A long silence. How many times are you going to say that? He asked. She pulled back from the scope slightly and looked at him. He was looking at her with those light eyes and the expression she'd been avoiding naming for the last 7 hours. Not fear, not doubt, but the look of a person who had decided to follow someone and was now, somewhere in themselves, asking whether that decision still held. Until it stops being true, she said. He held her gaze. Something moved through his face that she couldn't entirely read. Then he looked back through the spotting scope. I'm going to need a break from the scope in about an hour, he said. Eyes are starting to ghost. Okay. Your knee? Still there. That's not what I asked. She paused. It's worse than this morning. It's manageable. He nodded and didn't say anything about it again, which she'd asked for without asking for it. Another hour passed. The sky above the valley had shifted from pale morning gray to a cold, flat blue. Shadows were moving across the compound as the sun angle changed. She tracked them. The courtyard would be in direct sun for approximately 40 minutes, starting in the next 30 minutes, during which time the thermal activity on the east face would intensify before settling as temperatures equalized. 40 minutes of difficult windows. Then, as the sun angle dropped, the thermals would slow. The air would stabilize. She told Cole. He looked at his own notes on the thermal pattern and was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, that tracks. So we wait 40 minutes. And then? And then either he comes out or we decide. Cole checked the radio. 2 attempted comms checks to base in the last 4 hours had gotten partial response. They were close to the edge of the radio range at this elevation, with the terrain interference of the ridgeline. He'd gotten enough through on the last attempt to know that Decker was aware they were still on the mountain and had pushed the QRF timeline as long as he could. The next transmission window was in 45 minutes, 40 minutes of patience, 45 until they had to make a call to base, 5 minutes of overlap. It wasn't a lot of room. Cole looked at her. She was already back behind the rifle. He shook his head slightly. She didn't see it, but she would have recognized the motion if she had, and settled behind the spotting scope. The mountain had its own clock, and it did not care about theirs. The 40 minutes passed the way high-altitude time always passed. Not slowly, not quickly, but with a specific quality of weight that had nothing to do with the clock and everything to do with what was at stake inside each second. Erica did not move. Her body had reached the state she recognized from the longest positions she'd held in training, past discomfort, past the first and second waves of muscle fatigue, into something that wasn't comfort, but was a kind of negotiated truce with the physical. The cold was a fact. The knee was a fact. The rifle stock against her cheek was a fact. She had filed all of these under acknowledged and deferred and given everything else to the scope. The compound's courtyard sat in flat afternoon light now, the shadows of the eastern wall pulling back as the sun continued its arc. 2 sentries on the perimeter, 1 in the watchtower. Whoever was inside the main structure had not reappeared. Cole was tracking the thermals. East face is settling, he said. His voice had gone to the particular register of focused spotters, quieter than conversation, more precise than whisper. Mirage is flattening. I'd say we're 2 minutes from the clean window. She didn't answer. He didn't need her to. The radio crackled. Cole reached for it, keyed the handset. Valor Base, this is Ghost Element. Over. Static. Then, faintly, broken by terrain interference, Ghost Element. Valor Base. What is your status? Over. Cole looked at her. She kept her eye on the scope. Your call, he said quietly. She was watching the courtyard. The mirage signature along the valley floor was smoothing. The heat shimmer that had bent the air for the past 90 minutes was pulling back like a tide going out, leaving the atmosphere between her position and the target cleaner than it had been all morning. Tell them we are on station, Target not yet visible. Requesting hold on extraction timeline. Cole keyed, transmitted, waited. The response came back in fragments, the terrain chewing the signal into pieces. Copy your status. Decker says. Window is critical. Need decision in minutes. Over. How many minutes? Cole asked into the handset. More static. Then 15. Decker says 15. After that he pulls the QRF and you're on foot. Over. Cole looked at her again. 15 minutes. Copy, he said into the handset. Ghost element out. He set the radio down. Looked through the spotting scope. Lane. I heard. 15 minutes isn't enough time to... I heard, Cole. He went quiet. She could feel the calculation he was running, the same one she was running, except that his had a variable hers didn't. The threshold at which a reasonable person decided the mission was over and survival became the only objective. It was a legitimate variable. She wasn't going to pretend it wasn't. If he doesn't come out in the next 5 minutes, she said, we pack and we move. He processed that. And if he does, then I need 30 seconds of clean air after the thermal clears. You'll have maybe 90 seconds of good window based on the pattern. I know. The shot itself is 7+ seconds of flight time. I know. So you need to fire inside the first minute of the window to guarantee the bullet clears before the next thermal builds. Cole. She said it without irritation. Just his name, with a full stop at the end. He understood. He looked back through the spotting scope and said nothing. Erica settled deeper into the rifle. 8 minutes left. She had been here before, in the specific sense that mattered. Not at this range, not with this much riding on a single calculation, but in the state of waiting with a deadline pressing against a door that might not open. The feeling was not panic, and it was not calm. It was something between them that she had no good word for, a kind of crystalline alertness that made everything very simple. The crosshair, the courtyard, the breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The mirage was flat. The air was clean. The window was open. The courtyard was empty. 7 minutes. Cole tracked the spotting scope in a slow pan across the compound, checking the sentries, checking the structure doorways, logging everything. Watchtower guard just changed his position, he said. Moved to the south face. He's looking away from the courtyard. She noted it, filed it, kept watching the main structure door. 6 minutes. A sound behind them. Wind picking up from the northwest, moving through the rocks with a low, directionless note that was the mountain doing what it did at altitude when the afternoon temperature differential started working. She'd accounted for this in her wind model. The northwest component would partially offset the valley thermal. If it held at current velocity, it actually improved the shot geometry. If it held, nothing at altitude held reliably. 5 minutes. Cole said, if we're leaving at 0, I need to start breaking down the spotting scope at 2 minutes. 2 minutes, she confirmed. He kept his eye on the scope. 4 minutes. The main structure door opened. Cole's voice went absolutely flat. Movement, main door, single figure. She saw it in the same instant. A man stepping out, the same coat as before, the same unhurried movement of someone in a place they believed to be safe. He walked into the courtyard and stopped at the same location as before, near the shallow depression, 6 or 7 feet north of where she had her turret set. Range, she said. Cole dialed. 3072. He's closer to us than the earlier position by 8 meters. 8 meters. At this distance, that was a meaningful adjustment. She moved the elevation turret 3 clicks, recalculated the windage for the northwest component. Wind at position? She asked. Stable. Northwest at 4. He paused. Mid-valley. I'm reading the same. East face thermal has not rebuilt. She pulled a breath and let it go. Bodyguard? She asked. He's at the doorway, not in the courtyard. Good. Not because it changed the shot geometry. The bodyguard wasn't the target, but because a bodyguard standing in an open doorway was a bodyguard who hadn't yet received a reason to pull the principal back inside. The figure in the courtyard looked up at the sky, looked east, looked west. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Erica put the crosshair on the center of the figure's upper torso and began the sequence she had run 10,000 times in training and 14 times in the field. Not a checklist, not a procedure. Something older than both. The physical language of a shooter in final preparation, the body doing what the body had been taught until the teaching became instinct, bipod pressure even. Stock to cheek weld confirmed. Grip relaxed, not clutched. Trigger finger indexed alongside the guard, not yet on the trigger. Breathing. Wind holding, Cole said quietly. She exhaled 2/3 of a breath and stopped. Range confirmed, Cole said. 3070. Her finger moved to the trigger, and then the radio crackled. Not the soft static of a weak signal. A hard burst. Decker's voice, clear and sharp, and carrying the specific urgency of a man transmitting something he needed received. Ghost element, abort. I say again, abort mission. Intelligence reports possible civilian movement in the target compound. Stand by. Cole's hand went to the handset. Erica did not move. Her finger was on the trigger. Her eye was in the scope. The crosshair was on the target. Lane, Cole said. His voice had changed. The spotter's register was gone. This was just a person talking to another person in a situation that had just become something different. Did you copy that? She had copied it. She also had the target in her scope. She had a 3,070-meter clean shot with stable wind and a full atmospheric window that had taken 9 hours to produce. She had a 48-hour intelligence window that expired in 22 hours. She had a man in her crosshair who had survived 3 previous interdiction attempts and would not present again in any predictable time frame. And she had a voice on the radio saying abort because of a possible civilian presence. Possible. She lifted her finger off the trigger and pulled her eye back from the scope. Cole was staring at her. She reached out, took the handset from him. Valor Base, this is Ghost Element. What is the nature of the civilian report? Over. Static. Then Decker. Source in the Valley reports a family group, possibly, in the eastern structure, unconfirmed. Intel is reviewing. Stand by. She set the handset down without responding. Cole was watching the spotting scope. The figure in the courtyard is still stationary, he said. His voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. I know. Lane, I'm not going to fire on an unconfirmed civilian report, Cole. She said it before he could finish the sentence. Said it clearly, without drama, because it was true, and because she needed him to know she had already decided it without being told. He exhaled. Okay, but I need to know what's in that eastern structure before I stand down. How are you going to... Your scope. Eastern structure doorway. What do you see? Cole moved the spotting scope. Tracked. Dialed in the eastern building's door. 20 seconds of silence. Doorway is open, he said. I can see... He stopped, adjusted. I've got 2 adult males in the doorway, armed, both carrying AKs slung on their backs. They're talking. Any other movement? Negative. Windows on the eastern structure. Are any open? He scanned. 1, ground level, northeast corner. What's in it? Cole moved the scope to the window, dialed in. A longer pause. Curtain, he said. It's moving, from inside. Wind? We're on the lee side of the eastern structure. No direct wind on that face. A curtain moving from inside a room on the lee side of a building with no direct wind contact. That was a person standing at the window. Adult or child? She asked. I can't tell from the movement, just the curtain. She picked up the handset again. Valor Base, Ghost Element. Eastern structure shows 2 armed adult males in the doorway and interior movement in the northeast window. Request Intel confirm civilian report. What is the source and how recent? Over? Static. A long pause. Then Decker. Source is a contact in the valley. Report came in 20 minutes ago. He said he saw a woman and 2 children entering the compound this morning. This morning, she looked at Cole. He looked at her. This morning covers our entire observation window, she said. Not to anyone. Just putting it in the air. Could have come in and gone out, Cole said. Could be in the eastern structure. We can't confirm either way. The figure in the courtyard was still standing there, 2 minutes and 15 seconds left on the window. She had spent 9 hours and 4,100 feet of mountain climbing and more cold than she could accurately quantify to arrive at this moment, And the moment was now telling her it was not as simple as it had looked from a conference table 3 days ago. She keyed the handset. Valor Base, I need confirmation or denial of civilian presence in that compound before I can proceed. What is your timeline on the intel review? Over. Decker's voice came back. Minimum 30 minutes for source verification. Over. 30 minutes. The window would be gone in 2. Cole was watching her. She was watching the courtyard. The figure was still there. 2 minutes from now, he might go back inside. 2 hours from now, the thermals would be building again. Tomorrow, he might not come out at all, or the weather would turn, or the intelligence window would close, or something else would happen that the mountain didn't care about, and the mission couldn't absorb. 1 minute 30. Ghost element, Decker said over the radio, and his voice had lost the command quality now, replaced by something more direct. The call is yours. I'm not ordering a fire or a hold. You are on station. What do you see? Over. She almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was the truest thing he'd said. She looked through the scope. The courtyard was clear. The target was standing in the open. The 2 armed males in the eastern doorway were looking away from the courtyard, engaged in conversation. The curtain in the northeast window was still. If there were children in that compound, they were inside a building on the opposite side of the courtyard from the target. They were behind stone walls. They were in no danger from a single precision round aimed at a specific individual 50 meters away. If the curtain was a child at the window, a child looking out at the valley, that child was not in her crosshair. That child was not in any danger she was creating. She put her finger back on the trigger. Cole, she said. Wind. He was back behind the spotting scope without any hesitation that she could hear. Northwest 4 stable. No thermal signature. Window is clean. Range. 3068. 2 clicks on the elevation turret. I'm ready, Cole said. She exhaled 2/3 of a breath. The crosshair settled. Everything got very quiet. Not the quiet of absence. The compound still had sentries, the radio was still hissing static, the wind was still moving through the rocks behind her, but the kind of quiet that happens when a decision has been fully made and the body is simply executing it and the mind has stepped back to let the body work. Her finger applied pressure to the trigger. Not a pull, not a jerk. A steady, even increase in pressure, so gradual that the break, the moment the firing pin fell, was not a conscious act but an inevitable conclusion. The rifle fired. The recoil pushed her back a fraction of an inch, and she was already reacquiring through the scope before the sound of the shot had fully registered in her own ears, watching the trace of the bullet's vapor trail, invisible to most, readable to her, as it crossed the valley in a long, curving arc. 1 second. 2. The trail bent slightly south, the northwest wind, just as she'd calculated. 3. 4. She kept the crosshair on the target. The figure had not moved, had not heard the report yet. Sound traveled slower than the bullet, and at this distance the bullet arrived before the sound wave. 5. 6. Cole had gone completely silent. 7 seconds. The figure in the courtyard dropped, not dramatically, not like the movies made it look. He simply stopped being upright and was on the ground, and the bodyguard in the doorway took a full 2 seconds to understand what had happened before he started shouting, and the sentries on the wall were still scanning for a threat that was 3,100 meters away on a ridgeline they couldn't see. Cole said one word. Hit! She was already moving. The rifle came off the bipod. The mat rolled. She moved with the specific controlled urgency of someone who had rehearsed the extraction sequence enough times that it didn't require thought, only execution. Pack it, she said. Cole was already collapsing the spotting scope tripod. He had the scope in its roll in 40 seconds. His pack was up in 60. She had the system case sealed in 90 seconds. The radio crackled. Decker's voice. Ghost element. We're tracking activity in the compound. Confirm status. Over. Cole keyed as he shouldered his pack. Valor Base, Ghost element. Mission complete. We are moving. Out. He didn't wait for a response. They were already at the back edge of the rock shelf and moving north along the ridgeline, away from the direct descent route they'd used to climb, taking the less obvious line that she'd identified during the approach as the better extraction path if they had contact. She was running on the knee. It was not nothing. Every impact on the downhill grade sent a bright signal from the joint that her body was keeping track of, even if her mind was filing it away. She shortened her stride, shifted weight to the poles, kept moving. Behind them, across the valley, she could hear, even at this distance, the sound of the compound. Shouting. A vehicle engine starting. A burst of automatic fire, directed at nothing specific, into the mountainside. The kind of fire that people send when they're angry and afraid and don't have a target. They didn't have a target. She was already 300 meters from the hide position and moving fast. "How's the knee?" Cole said behind her. Not stopping, just asking. "Ask me at the bottom," she said. He didn't push it. They moved down the ridgeline for 20 minutes before she turned them onto the diagonal descent route. Steeper, faster, but requiring the kind of footwork that asked a lot of a joint that was already expressing opinions. She went down it anyway. Cole followed without comment. At the 40-minute mark, with the compound sounds long lost to distance and terrain, she called a stop in a rock depression that gave them cover on 3 sides and a sight line down into the valley below. She set the system case down, leaned against the rock, let the knee do what it was going to do without fighting it. Cole sat across from her. His face was flushed from the descent, breath visible in the cold air. He had a cut on his right hand from a rock face he'd grabbed on the steepest section. She hadn't seen it happen, which meant he hadn't made noise about it. She noticed it now. "That needs tape," she said. He looked at his hand like he'd forgotten it existed. "Yeah." She pulled the small IFAK from her outer pocket, found the self-adhesive bandage roll, tossed it to him. He wrapped the cut without taking his gloves off, which was inefficient, but she understood. Fingers at altitude in this cold were a resource you protected even when inconvenient. "That was 7 seconds, Cole said. She looked at him. "I counted," he said. "From the shot." He shook his head slightly. 7.2 seconds. He paused. "I've never spotted for anything over 2,000. "I know." "When you didn't fire on the abort call," he stopped, started again. "I thought you were going to stand down." "I almost did," she said. He processed that. "What changed?" She was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, actually thinking about it. "The curtain was moving from a draft inside the room," she said. "Not from a person standing at the window. The northeast corner of that structure gets indirect downdraft off the overhang when wind comes from the northwest. The curtain was moving from that, not from someone standing there." Cole stared at her. "You calculated that," he said. "In about 30 seconds. I'd been watching that wall for 9 hours. She shrugged, and the shrug hurt her shoulder where she'd absorbed recoil, so she stopped doing it. "I noticed the overhang in the first hour. I noticed the wind pattern at that corner at hour 4. By the time the curtain moved, I'd already been thinking about what would move it." He was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't tell Decker any of that on the radio." "There wasn't time to explain it," she paused. "And it wouldn't have changed the abort call. Intel was doing the right thing by flagging it. I just had information they didn't. Information you'd been building for 9 hours. "Yes." Cole looked at his wrapped hand, looked at the valley below them, looked at the system case next to her. "The shot," he said, 3,100 meters, give or take. 3,104 based on your final range. At altitude, in mountain thermals, with a 6-knot northwest crosswind. 4 to 6 variable." He shook his head. Not dismissively. "The way you shake your head at something you can't quite fit into the framework you've been using." "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked. She thought about that. "Montana," she said. He waited for more. She didn't give him more. Not because she was being cryptic, just because Montana was actually the complete answer, and most of the things that mattered about it couldn't be compressed into a conversation on a cold mountainside with a QRF overdue and 2 kilometers of descent still ahead. Cole nodded slowly, accepting the answer for what it was. She picked up the radio, keyed it. "Valor Base, Ghost Element. We are at extraction waypoint 2. Knee compromised. Mobile, no contact. Estimated LZ arrival in 2 hours. Request QRF hold until then. Over." The response came back clear. They were below the ridgeline interference now. Decker's voice. Copy ghost element. QRF is holding. We have the compound on ISR. Activity is elevated, but no active pursuit tracked in your direction. A pause. Good copy on mission complete. Over. She set the handset down. Good copy on mission complete. She sat with that for a moment. The cold. The cut on Cole's hand. The knee. The 7.2 seconds of a bullet crossing a valley that looked like an oil painting from up here and felt like a different planet from inside it. She didn't feel the way the debriefers would later assume she felt when they asked her about the moment and she gave them the flat, accurate answers they wrote down in reports. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel relieved exactly. She felt the particular exhaustion of a body that had been asked to do a very specific and difficult thing for a very long time and had done it, and was now in the process of settling the account with itself. Her hands were steady. That surprised her slightly. She'd expected some physical response, a tremor, something. But her hands on the system case were just hands, the same hands that had assembled the rifle in the armory 2 days ago. Cole was watching her. "You okay?" he asked. She considered the question. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. She stood up. Her knee announced itself clearly, and she listened to it and redistributed weight accordingly. 2 kilometers, she said. Cole stood, shouldered his pack. 2 kilometers, he confirmed. They started down the mountain. The valley below was getting its late afternoon light, long shadows stretching east, the sky above the ridgelines going from blue to a deeper, colder shade that wasn't quite purple, but was heading there. The compound was somewhere behind them and above them, hidden by terrain and distance, already becoming a location on a map rather than a place she'd been watching for the better part of 2 days. She thought about the shot, not the result, the process, the 2/3 breath, the trigger pressure, the 7 seconds of the bullet in the air while she watched the trace cross the valley, and the crosshair stayed where it was, because moving it would have told her nothing useful, and she had done what she could do, and after that it was physics. She thought about her father sitting at the kitchen table in Lolo, Montana, with a cup of coffee and a newspaper, not knowing where she was. She thought about what she'd tell him when she got back to a phone. Probably nothing specific. He'd know from the way she said fine what kind of fine it was. He'd taught her that too. How to mean more than one thing at the same time without lying about either of them. Below her the valley was quiet. The mountain didn't care. She kept walking down. They reached the LZ with 11 minutes to spare. The helicopter came in low from the south, running without lights, the sound of its rotors arriving before the machine was visible against the darkening sky. Cole popped a chemical light, IR, invisible to the naked eye, readable through night vision, and held it overhead for 3 seconds, then pocketed it. The helicopter corrected its approach and set down in the flat area between 2 rock formations with the casual precision of a crew that had done this in worse conditions. Erica walked to it on the knee, which had stopped sending signals and gone to a deeper, more expensive kind of discomfort that she recognized as the joint's way of informing her that the bill would arrive tomorrow. She loaded the system case through the side door, pulled herself in, and sat against the airframe as Cole climbed in behind her. The crew chief looked at them both, did the quick accounting that crew chiefs do, 2 personnel, 1 case, no visible blood except the wrapped hand, and gave the pilot a thumbs up. The helicopter lifted before the door was fully closed. She leaned her head back against the vibrating airframe and closed her eyes. Not sleeping, just letting the sound replace everything else for a few minutes. Cole sat across from her. She could feel him looking at her in the way people look at someone they've shared something significant with and aren't sure yet what category to put it in. She understood. She wasn't sure yet either. FOB Valor came up under them 22 minutes later. The landing was hard. The pilot brought it down fast, probably aware of the fuel state, and she felt the impact in the knee like a comment she hadn't asked for. She stood anyway, took the system case, and walked off the bird onto the concrete pad. Decker was there. He was standing at the edge of the pad with his hands in his jacket pockets and his beard catching the orange light from the base perimeter lamps, and his face was doing the thing it did when he was processing something he hadn't expected to need to process. She'd seen that face twice before. Once when unexpected intelligence had changed a mission mid-execution, and once when a soldier on the team had made a decision in the field that was technically outside the op order and turned out to be correct. He looked at her, looked at the system case. "Walk with me," he said. Cole peeled off toward the medical bay without being told. The hand needed actual attention, not just self-adhesive tape. She followed Decker toward the TOC. Neither of them spoke until they were inside, past the radio operators and the watch officer, into the small back room that Decker used for conversations he didn't want logged on the operations floor. He closed the door, sat on the edge of the table. She set the system case down and stood. "ISR confirmed the hit," he said. "Target is down." Compound showed immediate high-activity response for about 40 minutes after the shot, then went quiet. 2 vehicles departed the eastern side within the first hour. Pattern consistent with leadership flight, not civilian. She nodded. "So there were no civilians," she said. "We don't know that for certain. What we know is that the 2 vehicles that left carried armed personnel and moved toward a known secondary location we'd been watching for 3 weeks. He paused. "The source who called in the civilian report has been contacted. He's now saying he may have seen the movement the day before, but not this morning." She looked at him. "He's revising his timeline," she said. "He's clarifying his timeline," Decker said, with the expression of a man who knew exactly how thin that distinction was. "Either way, the abort call was appropriate, given the information we had, and your decision to continue was—" He stopped, chose the next word carefully. "Considered. Is that the word we're using?" "That's the word I'm using." He held her gaze. "There will be a debrief, a full one. Not tonight, but tomorrow. Intel is going to want every detail of the 9 hours on that mountain. So will the command element." "I know." "The abort order is going to come up." "I know." "I need to understand your reasoning before they ask you to explain it to people who are going to be looking for a problem." He said it plainly. Not threatening, practical. She told him, the same way she'd told Cole on the mountainside, the overhang, the northwest wind, the curtain, the 9 hours of observation that had preceded the moment she'd needed the data. She gave it to him in the same flat, sequential language she used in after-action reports. Observation, calculation, conclusion, action. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You didn't transmit any of that in real time," he said. "There wasn't time to explain a 9-hour weather observation in a 30-second radio window while the target was standing in my scope." "I know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "That's going to be the question. Whether the call was justified or whether you fired on an abort order and got lucky." "I didn't get lucky on the curtain analysis. I'd been building that read since hour 1. "I believe you." He said it simply. "The people in that debrief room tomorrow are going to want documentation. My wind log." She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket and pulled out the small green notebook, set it on the table between them. Decker looked at it, picked it up, opened it, read. She watched him turn pages. The twice-daily wind logs from every mission in the 3 weeks prior, the elevation notes, the thermal timing observations from the morning of the mission, the sequential documentation of everything she'd seen from that rock shelf. He looked up from the notebook. "You've been keeping this since you arrived," he said. "Since I arrived. Standard practice for you?" "My father started me on it when I was 12. He set the notebook down, looked at it for a moment. "Keep this," he said. "Bring it to the debrief." She picked it up. He stood from the table. "Get your knee looked at. Get some food and sleep. Brief is at 09. He was at the door when she said, "Decker?" He turned. "Was there pushback when you held the QRF past the window?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yes." "From command?" "From command and from someone on the team." He paused. "It doesn't matter now." "It does to me." He considered that. "Briggs wanted to pull you off the mountain at the 6-hour mark," he said. "He argued that the window was expired and the mission was a loss, and bringing you out before weather turned was the right call." She absorbed this. "He wasn't wrong," she said. Decker looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully parse. "No," he said. He wasn't. He opened the door. 09, Lane. She picked up the system case and went to get the knee looked at. The medic was a quiet specialist from Ohio named Garza, who'd been with the team for a year and had the practiced efficiency of someone who'd taped and wrapped and evaluated a lot of damaged joints in bad lighting. He pressed 3 specific points on the knee with 2 fingers, watched her face during each, and then said, "You've got some fluid. Nothing torn that I can feel, but I want an imaging look when we get you back to Bagram." "How long can I operate on it?" Garza looked at her. "Define operate." "Mission capable." "Honest answer? Another 36 to 48 hours before I'd have a real concern. After that, you're risking turning a manageable issue into a surgery." He paused. "But you should stay off it tonight." "I'll stay off it tonight." "I know you won't." She almost smiled. "I'll try." Garza wrapped it in a compression sleeve, gave her an anti-inflammatory that she pocketed, and told her to come back in the morning before the debrief. She thanked him, picked up the system case, and walked to her bunk. She slept for 6 hours without dreaming about anything she could remember. In the morning, she ate, took the anti-inflammatory, let Garza look at the knee again, and then walked to the operations center at 0850 with the green notebook in her left hand and the system case cleaned and re-stowed. The debrief room was not the small back room Decker used for private conversations. It was the main ops room, chairs arranged around the central table, and when she walked in, there were more people in it than she'd expected. Decker was there. The team intelligence officer, a captain named Marsh, who was 35 and wore her hair pulled back so tightly it looked like a statement of policy. 2 men she didn't recognize who wore civilian clothes that didn't fit right, and carried themselves in the way that people from oversight positions carry themselves. Not quite military, not quite not. A colonel she'd seen once in the command brief 3 weeks ago named Forsyth, who had the angular face of someone who'd spent time outdoors and the eyes of someone who spent most of his time behind a desk now and hadn't entirely forgiven himself for the transition. And Briggs, at the far end of the table, arms crossed, looking at the wall. She sat down. Forsyth didn't waste time. "Sergeant Lane, I'll be direct. The mission outcome is not in question. The ISR confirmation is solid, and the intelligence community is currently assessing the downstream impact of removing this target. That's a success." He folded his hands on the table. "What is in question is the decision to continue after the abort order. I want to understand it from you, in your words, sequentially." She told it sequentially. The same account she'd given Decker, same structure, same language. She opened the green notebook at the relevant pages and read the wind log entries for the thermal events, times, estimated magnitudes, the pattern she'd identified. She described the curtain, the overhang, the northwest wind component, the conclusion she'd drawn. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. One of the civilian clothesmen, the older of the two, with gray at his temples and the specific blankness of an agency background check, said, "You made a physics assessment about a curtain in a 3,100-meter target window in under 30 seconds. "It wasn't 30 seconds, she said. It was the conclusion of 9 hours of observation. The curtain was the last data point." "But the data existed in your head, not on paper." "The thermal data is in the log." She set the notebook on the table and pushed it toward him. "The overhang was documented at hour 1. The wind pattern at that corner was documented at hour 4. The connection between those 2 facts and the curtain movement took about 8 seconds. The man looked at the notebook without picking it up. 8 seconds, he said. "Yes." "Forsyth, you ignored a direct abort order." "I made a field assessment that the basis for the abort order did not apply to the conditions I could observe, which the abort order's issuing authority could not observe. I proceeded." "That's a significant distinction to draw in the field." "I understand that." If the civilians had been present, I would not have fired," she said. "The abort was about civilian safety. I assessed that the civilian safety concern did not exist based on 9 hours of direct observation. The abort was not a tactical order to preserve the mission for later. It was a safety call. I agreed with the safety principle and concluded the safety condition wasn't present." Silence. She kept her hands flat on the table. Marsh, the intelligence officer, leaned forward. "Walk me through the source revision, your assessment of why the civilian report was inaccurate." "I don't know that it was inaccurate," Erica said. I know that the curtain movement was consistent with an unoccupied room experiencing indirect draft from the overhang. That's not the same thing as knowing there were no civilians. It's consistent with no civilians at that window at that moment. Those are different statements. Marsh looked at her, made a note. You're careful, Marsh said. Not a compliment. An observation. Yes. Most people in your position would be trying to explain why they were definitely right. I was probably right, Erica said. I can't tell you I was certainly right. I can tell you the reasoning was sound. Forsyth looked at his hands, then at her. The shot, he said. 3,100 meters. 3,104 by Cole's final range. Verified by ISR as a single-round engagement. Yes. Cole's debrief says you held off on a prior appearance by the target to wait out a thermal event. Correct. That cost you approximately 4 minutes at a critical point in your extraction window. Firing through the thermal would have introduced an unacceptable vertical displacement at range. A miss at that point would have alerted the compound, burned the position, and compromised extraction. You made that call unilaterally. I made it in consultation with my spotter. She paused. Cole agreed. Forsyth looked at Briggs. Briggs had not spoken. He was still looking at the wall, but she'd noticed him shift twice during her account. Small movements, the kind people make when something they're hearing is reconfiguring something they'd already decided. Staff Sergeant Briggs, Forsyth said, you recommended extraction at the 6-hour mark. Your reasoning? Briggs looked at the colonel. His voice was even. The QRF window was expired. The weather was holding but not guaranteed. The target hadn't shown in 9 hours. He paused. In my experience, when a mission is past its operational window and the primary objective hasn't presented, you're taking on risk without return. And now? Forsyth asked. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Now I know the target presented 6 minutes after I recommended extraction, he said. And the shot was good. Another pause. I still think I was making the right call with the information I had. You were, Erica said. Everyone looked at her. He was making the right call with the information available to him from the base, she said. I had information he didn't. That's not a failure of his judgment. It's a limitation of distance. She looked at Briggs. From down here, the call was correct. From up there, I had enough additional data to justify the hold. Briggs looked at her. His expression was a complicated thing, not gratitude. She didn't think he was wired for that in this context. More like the look of someone who had been preparing for an argument and found the argument wasn't going to happen. He gave a single nod. Very small, very deliberate. She looked back at Forsyth. The colonel tapped 2 fingers on the table. The shot will be formally reviewed by the Range Assessment Division at Bagram, he said. The distance claim will need third-party verification against ISR ballistic trace data. That process takes 6 to 8 weeks. I understand. In the interim, you are not to discuss the specifics of the engagement range publicly or with personnel outside this room. He looked at the 2 civilian clothes men. For reasons you can probably infer. She could infer them. A shot at this range, verified, would become a data point in a much larger conversation about sniper capability, doctrine, and equipment requirements. A conversation that involved budget requests, program offices, and people at levels well above this room. That conversation needed to be controlled, not because the information was dangerous, but because the people who needed to present it wanted to present it on their own schedule. Understood, she said. Forsyth stood. Debrief is complete. Lane, you'll have a written summary to review and sign by end of day. Knee gets imaged at Bagram before you return to operational duty. He picked up his folder. Good work. He said it the way senior officers say good work, accurately, without warmth, and moving on before the words finished landing. The 2 civilian men followed him out. Marsh stayed a moment longer, wrote something on a card, and slid it across the table to her. When the review is complete, Marsh said, there are people in my chain who are going to want to talk to you. About training programs, about doctrine. She stood. I'm telling you now so you have time to decide what you want that conversation to look like. She picked up the card. A name and a secure contact number. She put it in her jacket pocket next to the notebook. Marsh left. The room was down to her, Decker, and Briggs. Decker hadn't spoken in 40 minutes. He stood up now, tucked his chair in, and said to the room in general, "Good debrief." He looked at her. "Bagram transport is day after tomorrow. Get the knee sorted." He walked out. That left Briggs. He was still at the far end of the table, arms uncrossed now, hands flat on the tabletop, looking at the space in front of him. She started picking up her materials. The notebook. The pen. She stood. "Lane." She looked at him. He was looking at her now. Something in his face was working itself out. She could see it, the internal processing of a person who had built a framework for understanding a situation and was now recalibrating. "The curtain thing," he said. "The overhang analysis." "Yes." "You knew that at the point of the abort call." "Yes." "And you didn't transmit it." "There wasn't time to explain it in that window." He was quiet. "But you could have tried," he said. "You could have called back and said, 'This is what I'm seeing. This is why the civilian concern doesn't apply,' requesting permission to continue." She considered the question honestly. "If I'd spent another 60 seconds on the radio," she said, "the target would have gone back inside and we wouldn't be having this conversation." "I know." He paused. "I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying, in a different scenario where the read was off and the civilians were there, the fact that you didn't try to get authorization first is going to matter." She held his gaze. "You're right," she said. He blinked, like he hadn't expected that. "I made a solo call in a situation where the cost of being wrong was very high," she said. "I believed I was right. I was right. But the architecture of the decision, yeah, that's worth looking at." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people who just did what you did would be sitting here defending every inch of it," he said. "Most people would be wrong to," she said. He looked at the table, picked up his own folder. "The 6-hour call," he said. "I want you to know, I wasn't trying to pull you out because I thought you couldn't do the shot." She waited. "I thought the mission was spent," he said. "I thought holding the QRF for a shot nobody had ever made was—" He stopped. "I thought the math didn't work." "It almost didn't," she said. "Yeah." He stood, straightened his jacket. 11 minutes. 11 minutes, she agreed. He walked to the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame and said without turning around, "For what it's worth, the curtain." Reading the draft off the overhang at 3,100 meters in 30 seconds under that kind of pressure. He paused. "I don't know anyone else who could have done that." She didn't say anything. He walked out. She stood alone in the debrief room for a moment with the notebook and the card from Marsh and the sound of the base operating around her. Her knee was announcing itself again. Garza had told her to stay off it. She was standing on it. She looked at the table where the green notebook had been slid toward a man from an agency she'd probably never be told the name of, and he'd looked at it without picking it up, and she'd felt something in that moment that she didn't quite have a word for. Not pride, not anger, something older and quieter than both. The recognition that what the notebook represented, 12 years of a girl in Montana writing down what the wind was doing, twice a day, in green notebooks she bought at the drugstore because her father had told her the land tells you things if you're quiet enough to hear it, was not something that fit in a debrief room or a formal review process or a program office conversation. It was just a habit, a discipline, a choice made thousands of times in ordinary moments that had accumulated into something that looked, from the outside, like an extraordinary moment. She put the notebook in her jacket pocket, walked to the door. Outside, the base was its usual controlled chaos. Vehicles moving, someone running a radio check, the smell of diesel and food from the DFAC 2 buildings over. The sky was a flat gray that promised nothing in particular. She walked toward the medical bay to get Garza to look at the knee before the transport arrangements were finalized. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from a number she recognized, Cole, on the team's internal messaging system. ISR, confirmed trace data. They're calling it 3,104 meters. She read it twice, put the phone back in her pocket, kept walking. The imaging at Bagram confirmed what Garza had suspected. A moderate effusion in the left knee, no structural damage. 6 weeks of restricted activity recommended by the orthopedic specialist who read the scan with the detached efficiency of someone who processed a lot of these and had stopped attaching narrative to them. 6 weeks, the specialist said, not looking up from the imaging display. What's the minimum? Erica asked. He looked up then. He had the expression doctors get when they recognize the type of patient sitting across from them. The type who is going to do what they're going to do regardless of what the doctor says, and is really just asking for the honest floor number rather than the cautious ceiling. 4 weeks of no high-impact activity and you won't make it worse, he said. But 6 weeks is what I'd put in the record. Put 6 in the record, she said. And thank you. She walked out of the medical facility into the Bagram afternoon. Cold here too, but a different cold than the Kunar ridgeline. Flatter and dustier, the cold of a high desert installation rather than a mountain. She sat on a concrete barrier outside and looked at her phone. Cole had sent a follow-up message after the ISR confirmation. Formal review is going to take 6 weeks. Forsyth's office says they'll issue a classified summary first, then a sanitized version for doctrine review. Your name stays off the sanitized version. A pause between messages, then, how's the knee? She typed back, 4 to 6 weeks. Knee is fine. He replied immediately, that's not what fine means. She put the phone away. The transport back to Kandahar, where her unit's main element was based, was the next morning. She had 18 hours in Bagram, a bed in the transient billeting facility, and the particular freedom of a person who has completed one chapter of something and hasn't yet been handed the next one. She called her father. It rang 4 times. He picked up on the 5th, which was normal. He moved slowly towards phones, as if rushing to answer them was a form of need he didn't want to display. It's me, she said. I know. A pause, the sound of a chair. You're at Bagram. She hadn't told him that. He'd worked it out from the call quality, probably, or from the time. He had a way of triangulating information from small signals that she'd inherited so completely, she sometimes forgot it was a skill, and not just how everyone processed the world. I'm at Bagram, she confirmed. How long? 1 night, then Kandahar, then I don't know yet. The knee. She closed her eyes briefly. How did you... You're sitting down and your voice is positioned differently than when you stand. He paused. You've been sitting for a while. It's fine, she said. Erica? It's manageable. It'll be fine. A long pause. She could hear the Montana evening in the background, wind through something, maybe the old pine at the corner of the yard that had been leaning south her entire life. Something happened, he said. Not a question. Something always happens. Something specific. She was quiet for a moment. I made a shot, she said. A long one. She heard him exhale, a slow, controlled breath that told her everything about what he was feeling and nothing about what he was going to say. How long? He said. Finally. Long, she said. Another silence. Longer this time. Was it clean? He asked. She understood what he was asking. Not the technical question. The other one. The one that didn't have a ballistics answer. Yes, she said. You sure? I'm sure. The wind moved through the pine in Montana, 3,000 miles away and 2 days removed from a rock shelf in the Hindu Kush, and she could see that tree as clearly as if she were standing in the yard. The way it leaned, the way it caught light in the afternoon, the way her father had said every year for 20 years that he was going to cut it down before it fell on the fence, and every year had left it standing because he'd become used to it, and because some things you keep not because they're practical, but because they're yours. Come home when you can, he said. I will. Not for me, for the knee. I know, Dad. Montana air doesn't fix a knee, but it doesn't hurt it either. She almost laughed. I know, he said. I'm proud of you. 3 words. He didn't use them often. When he did, he meant the full weight of them, not the reflexive pride of a parent watching a child perform, but the specific pride of someone who understood exactly what the thing cost and respected the cost. "Thanks," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. She let it be small. They talked for 11 more minutes about nothing important. The pine tree, the price of propane, a mule deer he'd seen in the meadow below the house. Then he said he was going to eat, and she said goodnight, and the call ended. She sat on the concrete barrier for a while longer in the Bagram cold. The 6 weeks of restricted activity ended up being 5 weeks and 3 days by the time the orthopedic specialist cleared her for a return to full duty. He noted in the record that the recovery had been faster than projected, attributed it to prior conditioning, and didn't ask about anything else. She spent the first 2 of those weeks at Kandahar, working with the unit's intelligence section on target pattern analysis for 3 other priority objectives, doing the kind of desk work she was bad at, emotionally, and good at technically. She built targeting packages the same way she kept wind logs, methodically, from first principles, without assuming the obvious interpretation was the right one. In the 3rd week, Forsyth's office issued the classified summary. She read it in a small office at Kandahar, alone, on a screen that required 2 authentication factors and would lock after 60 seconds of inactivity. The summary was 11 pages. The first 7 were operational context, intelligence value assessment, and downstream effects of the target's removal. Effects that were described in the careful, depersonalized language of strategic analysis, but represented, in concrete terms, a significant disruption to the network's command structure over the following 3 months. Page 8 was the engagement assessment. It described the shot in technical terms: range, conditions, outcome, verification methodology. It used the phrase exceptional marksmanship under extreme environmental conditions, and the phrase demonstrates capability at ranges previously considered operationally impractical, and a 3rd phrase she read twice. The decision calculus employed at the point of fire represents a level of integrated situational awareness that exceeds standard training benchmarks. She read that last phrase a 3rd time, not because it surprised her, because she was trying to understand what she felt about it, and the feeling was more complicated than she'd expected. There was something that should have been satisfying about official language confirming what she'd known was true, and it was satisfying, and it was also somehow beside the point in a way she couldn't articulate cleanly. She logged out of the system and went back to work. The formal verification came at the end of week 4. The Range Assessment Division's ballistic trace analysis, cross-referenced against ISR data and environmental recordings, confirmed the engagement distance at 3,104 meters. The official documentation, which would live in a classified annex that most people with clearances would never see, described it in the same flat technical language that all such documents used: 3,104 meters. It was, by any calculation she was aware of, the longest confirmed sniper engagement on record, not by a small margin. She found out about it the same way she found out about most things that concerned her directly, not from official notification, but from Cole, who sent a message that said, "Official 3,104. They're calling it a record. You okay?" She sent back, "Yes. You?" He replied, "Weird day." "Yeah," she wrote. "What do you do with something like that?" She held the phone for a moment. "Same thing you do with anything," she typed. "Keep working." He sent back a single period, which she'd learned was his version of agreement when he didn't have anything to add. She put the phone down and went back to the targeting package she'd been building. The formal acknowledgement, when it came, arrived not as a ceremony or an announcement, but as a meeting request from Forsyth's office for the following Tuesday at 1400 hours. She attended in a clean uniform, knee fully functional now, and found in the room Forsyth, Marsh, one of the 2 civilian-clothes men from the original debrief, and a general officer she recognized from photographs but had never met, a 2-star named Caldwell, who ran the Special Operations Command element for the theater. Caldwell was 60, compact, with the kind of face that had absorbed a lot of sun and wind over a career and had the texture to show for it. He looked at her when she walked in the way senior officers sometimes look at junior personnel, trying to reconcile what they've read about someone with the physical person standing in front of them, checking whether the reality fits the report. She sat when she was invited to sit. Caldwell spoke first. "Sergeant Lane." I'm not going to spend a lot of time on formalities because I understand that's not what you came here for, and it's not what I'm here for either. He folded his hands. The verification is complete. The record stands. This command is going to recommend you for the Distinguished Service Cross, for the Korengal engagement, and for 2 prior engagements cited in your service record. She kept her expression neutral. The recommendation will go up through channels, Caldwell continued. Approval is not guaranteed, but nothing at that level is. But the commanding general has already indicated his support. That process takes months. In the interim, I want to talk to you about something else. She waited. Marsh tells me you received her card in the debrief. Yes, sir. Have you thought about what she offered? A conversation about training programs and doctrine, she said. Yes, I've thought about it. And? She looked at Marsh briefly, then back at Caldwell. I have questions about what it would actually involve, she said, and what it would take me away from. Caldwell nodded. Honest answer. I respect that. He leaned back slightly. Here's what it involves, in plain terms. We have a marksmanship training pipeline that is producing competent shooters. We are not producing shooters who can do what you did in the Korengal. Part of the reason for that is equipment and doctrine, which we're working on separately. Part of it is instruction. Specifically, the kind of integrated environmental reading that your engagement demonstrated. He paused. We want you to help us build a curriculum for that. Not full-time, not a permanent desk assignment, rotational. You maintain operational status, you come in for 6-week training blocks twice a year. She thought about it. The curriculum, she said. Who has authority over the content? Caldwell looked at Marsh. Marsh said, you would have primary authority over the marksmanship and environmental assessment components. The training division has authority over scheduling and resource allocation. And if my content recommendations conflict with existing doctrine, then we have a meeting, Marsh said, and we work it out. Erica looked at the table for a moment. I want it in writing, she said. The primary authority on content, not as a courtesy, as a formal assignment of responsibility. Caldwell looked at the civilian man. The civilian man gave no visible response, which was itself a response. We can do that, Caldwell said. She looked up. Then yes, she said. I'll do it. Caldwell nodded once. The meeting ended 12 minutes later. As people were collecting their materials, Marsh caught her eye and gave her a small, deliberate nod that carried more information than its size suggested. Something like well done, and something like I expected that compressed into a single motion. She nodded back. In the hallway outside, she passed the civilian man on his way out. He stopped. One question, he said. She stopped. The curtain, he said. In the debrief, you said the connection between the overhang data and the curtain movement took 8 seconds. He paused. Is that actually true, or were you making yourself sound more certain than you were? She looked at him. It was closer to 6, she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he walked away without another word. She went back to work. The 5 remaining weeks of the deployment were not dramatic. She finished 3 targeting packages, participated in 2 planning cycles for missions she wasn't running, and attended a weapons qualification evolution where she shot with 4 junior snipers who were good and knew it, and became very quiet after she shot alongside them. She didn't try to create that moment. It just happened the way those moments happen when capability is demonstrated without announcement, the group recalibrating in real time. The silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but was informative. Afterward, a specialist named Reyes, 20 years old and from somewhere in Central California, had come up to her at the cleaning bench and said, "How do you read the wind that fast?" She'd thought about the question for a moment. "You write it down," she said. He'd looked at her like that wasn't the answer he'd been expecting. "Every time," she said. "Every position. Wind direction, estimated velocity, what the vegetation is doing, what the mirage is doing. You write it down for a year, 2 years. Then you stop needing to write it down because it's in you." She paused. "But you have to write it down first." Reyes had looked at his cleaning kit. Then he'd pulled out a small notebook, not green, a brown one with a waterproof cover, and set it on the bench between them. "I started 6 months ago," he said, "but I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. She'd looked at the notebook. Show me the last entry, she said. He'd opened it and slid it toward her. She'd read the entry. Date, position, conditions, wind log, notes on mirage behavior. The notation system was different from hers, less structured in places, more detailed in others, but the underlying observation was sound. You're doing it right, she said. He'd picked up the notebook, looked at it for a moment, and then put it back in his pocket with the particular care of a person putting something away that they've decided matters. She'd gone back to cleaning her rifle. On the day before the unit rotated back to the States, she found herself in the equipment bay at Kandahar, doing a final check on the system before it went into the unit armory for the handover. She broke it down the way she always did, component by component on the white cloth, in the order she always used: barrel, bolt, trigger group, stock. Scope off last. Briggs walked in. He was carrying his own kit, doing the same pre-rotation inventory. He sat up at the bench next to hers without acknowledging her specifically, which was the same neutral body language they'd maintained for the 5 weeks since the Bagram debrief. Not cold, not warm, just two professionals sharing a workspace. They worked in silence for a few minutes. Then Briggs said, without looking up from his kit, "I heard about the curriculum position." "News travels," she said. "This base is 63 people. News is the only thing that moves faster than the wind." He ran a patch through his barrel. "You going to take it?" "Already said yes." He nodded. "Worked." "You're good at this," he said. Not the shot. She understood that. The whole thing. The assessment, the patience, the notebook, the way she'd walked into that debrief room and given them exactly what they needed without performing certainty she didn't have. "I've been doing it since I was 8, she said. "I know," he paused. "I read your file. Properly, I mean. After Bagram." He set the barrel down, looked at it. "Your old man is Dale Lane. 63rd Marines, 2 tours, 1 in Iraq, 1 in Helmand." She kept working. "He taught me," she said simply. "I know." Another pause. "He lost 2 fingers in Helmand." "Yes. I knew someone who served in that rotation." He picked the barrel back up. "Not him, but I knew the rotation, the conditions." He cleared his throat. "Your father served in conditions that were bad." She didn't say anything. "I'm saying," Briggs said, and then stopped, and then started again. "I'm saying I understand now where the stillness comes from, the patience." He seemed uncomfortable with the word. "It's not a personality thing. It's trained. It's specific." "Both," she said. "Both," he agreed. They worked in silence for another few minutes. She reassembled the rifle, did the functions check, set it on the cloth. "For the record," Briggs said finally, "I was wrong about you. From the beginning." She looked at him. He was looking at his own kit, not at her. His jaw was set in the way it's set when he was saying something that cost him something. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "Just putting it on the record." "It's on the record," she said. He nodded. She picked up the rifle and carried it to the armory rack. That was the end of it. No ceremony, no handshake, just the record, acknowledged, and 2 people going back to work. She flew home 8 days later, Kandahar to Ramstein to Dulles to Missoula. The last leg on a regional carrier with 31 seats and a pilot who announced the weather in Montana with the unconcerned cheerfulness of someone who considered 38 degrees and overcast to be perfectly acceptable conditions. Dale was waiting at the gate. He was wearing the same jacket he'd been wearing for 15 years. A waxed canvas barn coat that had started dark brown and was now the color of old wood. He had a coffee in one hand and his other hand in his pocket. When she came through the gate, he looked at her the way he always looked at her when she came back from somewhere. A quick professional inventory, checking for the changes that didn't show in photographs or over phone lines. "Knee," he said. "It's fine," she said. Let me see." "Dad? Let me see." She walked a slow 10 steps down the terminal concourse. He watched. "It's fine," he said, because it was, and because he'd needed to see it himself. They drove back to Lolo in his truck, the same truck he'd driven for 11 years, with the cracked dashboard and the heating system that worked on the driver's side only. She sat on the passenger side with her jacket on and watched the mountains come back, the way they appeared first as shapes against the cloud cover and then as detail, the ridgelines she could name, the valleys she'd grown up looking at, the country that had built the specific version of her that existed. "How long?" he asked. 30 days leave. Then I report to Fort Bragg for the curriculum project." He nodded, drove. "You're going to teach," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to teach them?" She looked out the window at the mountains. "How to write things down," she said. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but occupied the same space. They drove the rest of the way in the comfortable silence of two people who had learned to share space without filling it, which was its own kind of language. Maybe the first one either of them had ever been fluent in. The house was the same. The pine tree at the corner of the yard was still leaning south. The kitchen still smelled like coffee and wood smoke. Her old room had her competition trophies on the shelf above the desk, the ones she'd never taken with her because they belonged here. In this house. In the version of her life that had made the other version possible. She set her bag down and stood in the doorway. Dale was in the kitchen, already at the stove. "Eat first," he said. "I'm not that hungry." "Eat anyway." She sat at the kitchen table. He made eggs and toast, the same breakfast he'd made her before every major event of her life. Competitions, graduation, the morning she'd shipped out to basic. He set the plate in front of her and poured 2 coffees and sat across from her. She ate. Outside the window, the Montana sky was doing the thing it did in early evening, a gray light that wasn't quite darkness, sitting on the ridgelines like something patient, like something that had been there before anyone was watching and would be there after. "The shot," her father said, not asking, just naming it. "Yes." "Long." "Yes." He wrapped both hands around his coffee. The 2 fingers that weren't there on his right hand, the ones the roadside device had taken, left a gap in the grip that she'd been aware of her whole life, that she'd stopped seeing consciously sometime around age 10 and now saw again every time she came home, the way you re-see things when you've been away. "Are you okay?" he asked. Not about the knee, not about the record, not about the debrief or the curriculum or the classified summary or anything with a technical answer. She thought about it. "I think so," she said. I'm still sorting out what it means." "That's honest," he said. "I keep thinking about the 7 seconds," she said. "The bullet in the air, 7.2 seconds where I couldn't do anything, where it was just physics and waiting. And that was the part I hadn't trained for," she said. "The waiting after. The knowing that the calculation was done and the outcome was already determined and there was nothing left for me to do except watch." Dale was quiet. "That's not a shooting problem," he said. "No," she said. "It's not. That's the problem nobody trains you for." He set his coffee down. "You learn to control everything you can control. And then the bullet leaves and you can't control anything, and you have to be okay with that." "I know," she said. "I was okay with it." "I know you were." He looked at her. "I'm asking if you're okay with it now, later, when it's quiet." She held his gaze. "I'm working on it," she said. He picked his coffee back up, nodded. "That's the right answer," he said. "That's the honest answer." They finished eating. She washed the plates because he'd cooked, which had been the arrangement since she was old enough to reach the sink. He dried, which had been his side of it, and the whole ritual was so familiar it had its own weight. Not heavy, just present, the way the things you've done 1,000 times become part of the architecture of who you are. She went to bed at 9 and slept for 10 hours. In the morning, she went out to the ridge above the meadow where she'd taken her first real shot at 13. The cleared hillside, the target her father had set at 300 meters, the tall grass that was dead and brown now in late autumn. She sat on the same rock she'd sat on for years and looked out at the valley below. She didn't have a rifle. She didn't need one. She sat there for an hour and watched the meadow and the tree line and the way the wind moved through the dead grass in patterns she could read without thinking, The language of the land coming up to meet her the way it always had, the way it always would. A deer appeared at the far edge of the clearing. She watched it. She didn't calculate range, didn't estimate wind, didn't do anything except watch it exist in the meadow, ears up, breath visible in the cold air, completely unaware that it was being observed from a ridge by someone who had spent 23 years learning to see farther than most people believed was possible. The deer stood there for a long time. Then it walked back into the tree line and was gone. She sat for another few minutes in the quiet. Then she pulled the green notebook from her jacket pocket and wrote down the date, the time, the wind direction, and what she'd seen. Same as always. Same as her father had taught her. The habit that had started at 12 years old and had accumulated into something she couldn't have built any other way. She closed the notebook. The valley was still. She'd learned a long time ago that the hardest distance to close wasn't measured in meters. It was the space between who you were and who you were willing to become. And the only way across it was the same way across every other impossible distance. One careful, patient, well-prepared step at a time, with your eyes open and your notebook in your pocket, writing down what the world is telling you before you need to know it. She put the notebook away and sat with the quiet a little longer. The mountain, somewhere far to the east, didn't care. She was starting to understand that the not caring was the point.